sí que es rápido. Limpia uno, limpia dos. Se va para el centro. Míralo, míralo que está en el área. Mira, tira el centro, tíralo, tíralo, por favor. Tira el centro, cabecea, zapata y
Hello everybody, it's me, Daniel Thompson, coming at you from the Sistine Chapel. Not really. Welcome to today's review of The Two Popes, the new film directed by Fernando Meirelles, starring Jonathan Pryce and Anthony Hopkins. I have been looking forward to seeing this film for 2 years. Ever since Netflix announced its production in 2017, I have been counting the days. For one thing, I love biopics, and I just fell in love with the idea of this story. Also, Fernando Meirelles directed The Constant Gardener, which I love, and Anthony Hopkins is one of my favorite actors of all time. To have him portray Pope Benedict XVI, I was hooked. So cut to 2 years later, and 2019, well, it's been a year full of a lot of highly anticipated films. Sadly, a lot of them have disappointed me. But I am happy to say that this movie did not disappoint. So The Two Popes centers on the conversations that supposedly took place between Pope Benedict XVI and Cardinal Bergoglio. I say supposedly because it is a known fact that these two men have met in real life, but what they talked about, we may never know. So Anthony McCartan pretty much had to use his imagination and an extensive amount of research to try to figure out, what could they have talked about? And I know what you're thinking. How can a movie about two old men talking about God sound appealing to you? Well, yes, they do talk about God, and faith and religion itself is a topic of discussion throughout the film. But it's not only about that. They touch up on issues such as homosexuality, abortion, celibacy, and pedophilia in the priesthood. This film does not shy away from any of those issues. But in the long run, this movie becomes a very deep, emotional, and intimate look at the personal lives of these two people. These two very different people. There's Pope Benedict, played by Anthony Hopkins. He is a conservative and a traditionalist, whereas Bergoglio, he's very progressive and very much a liberal. And when the movie starts out, he's very dissatisfied. He feels like the Catholic Church has become disconnected with the modern world, and he doesn't want to really associate with an institution that goes against his conscience. So he goes to Rome to meet the Pope, and he expresses his desire to resign from his position as the Archbishop. But here's the rub. Pope Benedict wants to resign the papacy, which shocks the hell out of him because, for one thing, popes don't usually resign. The last pope to resign was 700 years ago. This is a lifelong deal. The only way you can get out of it is to die. And what's even more shocking is that the pope refuses to accept his resignation because he actually thinks he should be pope. And Bergoglio just can't fathom why. How this story is set up is amazing because these are very extraordinary circumstances. The Catholic Church is probably the most powerful organization in the world. And here you're in the middle of a crisis where people are actually losing faith not only in the church but in God as well. So these two very different and opposing leaders in the church had to find a way to sort out their differences and figure out how are they supposed to lead the church in an ever-changing world. I love this script so much. Not only is the story compelling, but the dialogue is witty, funny, and very thought-provoking. And the actors just kill it. Anthony Hopkins steals the movie. You could tell this guy did his research. There are so many layers to this character, and Anthony Hopkins just brings them out in his own way. In one scene in particular, I remember him saying, God always corrects a pope by presenting the world with another pope. I should like to see my corrections. The way he says that line, at first you would think this is a moment of self-deprecation, self-defeat. But when you look at his eyes, it feels like he is challenging Bergoglio, almost daring him to do better than he did. And this character's journey and arc is written so well. Because he has to make this incredibly difficult decision, he has to reconcile his own insecurities. You would think a man in his position would be so sure of himself and so confident, when in fact there is actually a lot more than we realize. Yes, he's the Pope, but he is also very lonely and very isolated. And he's incredibly jealous of the love and attention that Bergoglio gets, and envious of the fact that he is very sure of his faith and of himself. And it's because of the qualities that he recognizes in this man that he feels like he would be more appropriate for the job. He may be stubborn in his ways, but he is also doing this very selfless act. He's doing this not for himself, but because he feels like it's the best thing for the church. He's suffering from poor health, obviously, but he also feels very spiritually disconnected from God. And he feels like the church doesn't need a man like me. They need a man like Bergoglio. Now let's talk about Jonathan Pryce, because after all, this movie is about him. He does a great job at portraying the reluctant hero. From the beginning, you know that this guy didn't want to be Pope. Not even during the conclave in which Pope Benedict was elected. He was actually one of the favorites to be elected, but he just didn't want that responsibility. And this movie uses a lot of flashbacks, jumping back and forth through time, back into the days of his youth when he was a priest in Argentina. And at that time, Argentina was under the rule of a dictatorship, and the film suggests that he may have had ties with that government. At first, I thought that these flashbacks would be very distracting, when in fact, they actually added more to his character. Not only that, but considering that this is a very dialogue-heavy film, it added a little action in there too. This film has scenes of torture and war violence, just to let you know. And from what you see in his past, you understand why he lives the way he lives and why he doesn't want to be Pope. And I'll say this for Jonathan Pryce. There was one great moment that I want to address. This is their second conversation. The first one didn't go so well because they basically clashed and they just didn't agree on anything. But in this particular scene, the Pope suggests that they just talk not like men of the cloth, but as brothers, as regular human beings. And during this scene, you could see that Jonathan Pryce is bringing forth a certain uncomfortability and awkwardness when it comes to interacting with the Pope. It's very difficult for him, but he tries so hard to listen and to try to be engaged with what this man is sharing, what he's telling him. And as the scene progresses, we slowly see a bridge being formed, as if he is truly beginning to understand what this man is like. And he realizes he's not so different from me after all. Yes, we may have different opinions, but he is actually very fascinating. This film becomes a tale of forgiveness and basic human understanding. I love this film a lot. Whether you're religious or not, I feel like a lot of people can benefit from watching this movie. What this film is trying to do ultimately is to inspire unity and serve as an example of how it can be achieved when we set differences aside. Nowadays, people are very divided because of different opinions, and different opinions could cause animosity among people. Everyone's got an agenda, everyone's got a goal for themselves or for their party or whatever group that they're in. But the thing is, when we start to focus only on ourselves, we see the world not as a whole, but in part. When we set politics and self-interest aside, that's where progress can be made. Cardinal Bergoglio eventually becomes Pope Francis, and Pope Francis's main goal in life is to form bridges, not walls. I feel like a lot of world leaders would also benefit from watching this movie because this film shows us that it's important to learn from our past mistakes, not to repeat them. This was a highly entertaining and yet such an inspirational movie. I waited 2 years to watch this movie and it was well worth the wait. I'm gonna give The Two Popes an A+. I watched this film twice on Netflix and I wish I could watch it more, but sadly my free trial on Netflix expired after 30 days. I really hope Netflix releases this film on Blu-ray or DVD, if not Netflix, the Criterion Collection. I just want a physical copy of this film so bad. Anyway, thank you for watching my video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope to see you again next time.